My name is AHMED-RENGERS, and I'm here with Professor Karen Yeung from the University of Birmingham and Dr. LENA ULBRICHT from the Weizenbaum Institute for the Network Society, who together edited the special issue on algorithmic regulation for regulation and governance. LENA, what's the goal of this special issue on algorithmic regulation, and why should we be reading this now?
Thank you, Emma. So the entire project started when Karen and I met in person at a retreat, and I told her that I had been shocked and amazed to read her article about algorithmic regulation, which had appeared recently in Regulation and Governance, and that I had wanted to coin the concept too, but I was super happy and excited to foster the research and the concept development, because scholars from so many disciplines investigate algorithms and their social implications. So concepts like algorithmic regulation really help bringing them together. So based on this, we decided to organize a series of conference panels at the biennial meeting of the ECPR group, and then we issued this call for contributions. And it took us a few years, which were very fruitful, by the way, because so many things happened. And so this also enriched our conceptual development and assessment of algorithmic regulation, which you understand as a mode of social coordination and control by and through and of algorithmic systems. And so this special issue encompasses about a dozen of articles from scholars of various disciplines that look at very different use cases from all over the world, and who kind of engage with the concept of algorithmic governance and help us explore how the concept has developed in the last 5 years. Because so many things have happened. On the one hand, there's been an explosion and also a diversification of research that engages with the concept. In addition, there has been a widespread of use cases everywhere, especially in the public sector, and also accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, there's been in the last years, and especially since the publication of Karen's papers, a much more intense debate about necessary limitations to algorithmic regulation to algorithms. For example, think about the ethics, AI ethics debate, etc. So this is how the project started.
So what kind of scholars should read the papers in this collection?
Thanks, Emma. Well, just picking up on Lena's point about since the time when I first wrote the paper that she was referring to, there's basically been an explosion of scholarship and interest in the area. So at the time I was originally writing, I think it was fair to say it was still considered a rather niche, kind of slightly weird interest. Since that time, there's no question that interest in digital transformation has become really mainstream across a huge range of disciplines. So we expect that there'll be a number of scholars who identify with a very wide range of topics that come up in the field will find this collection interesting and relevant to their work. So those who work on platform capitalism or platform governance or surveillance studies, critical software studies, algorithmic accountability, particularly at the governance of algorithmic systems, which is particularly salient at the moment, as well as more technically oriented scholars. So for example, data protection lawyers are likely to find it quite insightful in thinking beyond the narrow frame of data protection into doctrinal terms, scholars from AI ethics, as well as scholars from the fact community who may not have engaged quite so widely with a broader range of social science literature might find it really worthwhile and illuminating, or at least we hope so.
All right, and can you tell us a little bit about what insights were produced by considering all the contributions in the special issue together?
So what we realized taking together all the contributions to the special issue was that indeed the concept is useful in the sense that very different use cases, starting from Uber, going to humanitarian aid, to anti-terrorism policies, can be fruitful attached to the concept and produce interdisciplinary dialogue and highlight what we know about how algorithms impact social structures, social ordering, subjectivation of individuals, etc. What we also realized, though, was that this concept is very much focused on what we call the developer's perspective, which means that you start with the algorithmic system, which its technical components and with the position that it has in a decision-making process. And from there, you will look at the social implications. And from there, you will be able to realize how these systems that are conceived of in a specific way kind of change when they come in contact with the real world and with the messiness of societies and individuals and social interactions. We also realized that this high level of generality of the concept, as coined by Karen in 2017, is somehow a benefit because many scholars can engage with it, but also complement it with other concepts, with theoretical elements from their specific disciplinary or interdisciplinary background. And therefore, it is a very good starting point for interdisciplinary dialogue.
Thanks, Lena. And we also realized by looking across the contributions that there were some limits to the concept as an analytical framing device, if you like. And I guess one of the central ones was recognizing that what was going on with the concept was really focusing on what actually happens at the stage once the data is inside or brought into the technical system, if you like. So we use the analogy of industrial processes, and we think about these systems as focusing, if you're looking at the concept of algorithmic regulation, at what goes on inside the algorithmic factory, if you like, and what are the outputs that the factory owner is hoping to generate from inside this algorithmic factory. But by doing that, what it does tend to assume is that we have factor inputs. In other words, the data is already there and it's ready to be processed, if you like. It's been brought to the factory door. But this, of course, only looks largely at one side of the ontological world of the computer, because the computer also needs data as well as algorithms. And to that extent, it doesn't tend to explore in any great depth what happens before the data comes into the factory. So that is one limitation. And the second limitation that became apparent looking at these use cases, if you like, and the way in which our scholars explore them, is that there are a number of algorithmic systems that actually have very little to do with generating decisions. And the way in which I originally conceived of the concept was thinking about decision-making within an algorithmic system. And there are many data visualization platforms that offer dashboards and bird's eye view of what happens to be going on in real time, which don't actually affect anything in the world, if you like. So they're not producing a decision in the way that a lawyer, for example, would think about what constitutes a decision. And that was another limitation that started to emerge once we looked at the way in which contributors were wrestling with the concept or a particular use case that didn't seem to fit the analytical concept as I'd originally articulated. So that was really valuable too. But as Lena says, I think one thing we did identify was this very kind of generic, highly abstracted perspective, which starts with the intention of developers who want to build a system that they hope will achieve something. In other words, they have a very intentional purpose that they hope will be usable in the real world. So you have a kind of model of what you want to achieve, and then you have the messy, real human world where things don't always go to plan, and you have to make some tricky decisions about operationalizing your vision. And that's where the concept of algorithmic regulation allows this direct point of contact and investigation, if you like, between the technical dimensions and the messy social dimensions, and in that way is able to open up opportunities for fruitful discourse between those two ways of looking at the world, if you like, because they come together inside the algorithmic factory as the deliverables are released into the world. You can see some of those implications once you follow downstream what happens.
It's also the moment where we realize how political many of these decisions of designers and users of algorithmic systems are. Yeah.
Well, these reflections sound really promising, and I'm really looking forward to reading the contributions.
Thank you, Emma.